Visit us at Eduvvo. Thank you for calling Eduvvo.
Now, which application will we build in this module? We'll build an expense planner. And that means that users should be able to add their expenses, like what you bought yesterday, bottle of milk, maybe some new shoes. You can add them, and we keep track of those expenses in a list. And then we also show a little chart that basically sums up what we spent over the last week. So our application will look something like this. And now come my awesome drawing skills. This is our iPhone or our Android phone. And in this application here, we'll therefore have a couple of things. We'll have our little chart up there, which we'll build, which will basically have little bars that indicate how much we spent on each day over the last week. Below the chart, I want to have a list of the transactions which we registered. And for each transaction, we kind of save the price, let's say, so what we spent, and then a little title here, something like that. I also want to make sure that we can, of course, add new items here. And for that, we'll have a little plus button here in the app bar. And I also want to have a so-called floating action button here at the bottom, which also has a plus. And both buttons, because this, of course, still is also a course where I want to show you something, will trigger in the end not a new page, but a new mode on the existing page. So we're still on the same page where we have that chart and so on. But once we press one of these plus buttons, a little bottom sheet should slide in. So this is a little sheet coming in from the bottom, overlaying the rest of this application. So behind that would be our list of transactions here. And in that bottom sheet, we'll have some inputs for the title and for the price, and also a date picker so that we can pick a date. And then, of course, a button to confirm this. Now, I can certainly draw nicer than that, or maybe I can't. But we can certainly build this app. And we'll build this app with some of the widgets Flutter gives us, with more than just the basic widgets we used thus far. And we'll then also use the various theming and styling features Flutter gives us to make this application look good. And with that, let's get started. I'm here in a brand new Flutter project, just a bit cleaned up. I removed all the comments and I converted this homepage widget into a stateless widget. And you find this main Dart file attached to this video in case you want to replace yours with it. I have no other widgets in this project right now. I haven't added any custom widgets. I haven't added anything. This is my basic setup. And now the goal is to get started, and we'll basically build this application as I just sketched it out, and we'll add new widgets as we need them, or dive into the widgets Flutter gives us as we need them. Now, what will we need to build this application? Remember that we had this chart area at the top, and below that we had a list of our transactions. So what we certainly have is at least two widgets sit next or above each other. We have that chart, and below that a list of transactions. That list, of course, also means that we have more than one item in there, but we can take care about that in a separate step. For the moment, let's start basic, and let's make sure that therefore on the body of our scaffold here, which is rendering that page of our app, that there we have a column, because we will have two items in there. Hence, we should add the children key here to the column, and in there, I want to have these, as I said, two areas. Now, for the moment, I'll add a card here, and card is a built-in widget, which is this pre-styled container I mentioned earlier. I'll add a card here to later hold my chart. For the moment, the child which I add in the card, so the widget that is wrapped by that pre-styled container, that will be a text widget where I say chart, simply as a placeholder, of course. We'll add a real chart there later. Now, below that card, I want to have that list of transactions. So for now, let's add another card here where we say list of TX for transactions simply. Let's save that and let's see if that works. And for that, I'll start my app in without debugging. So I pressed the shortcut for this option here, start without debugging, and I want to see whether that works. So let's wait for that to build and launch. And with this launch, this is what we get. You might barely be able to see the card effect here. If you watch really close on your own screen, probably, you see that the text is inside of a tiny container with a white background and a little drop shadow there. So this is certainly not the final look you want here, but at least we have two widgets sit on top of each other. Now, since we use that card, and since the card is one of the more important base widgets Flutter gives you, let's see how we can make sure that this looks a bit better, that this also takes up more space. And for that here, let's press Control Space and see what we can configure on the card. We could set the color, the background color. We can also set the elevation, which simply is a double, which controls how strong that drop shadow is. We can also set a margin, which adds some space around it. And the other fields here aren't that helpful to us right now. So let's maybe go with elevation and set this to 5. And let's see how this changes things. Now we can see a bit of a more stronger drop shadow on that first widget or on this first card. But what we haven't changed at all is the size. For this you have to know that the card by default assumes the size of its child. So if we want to change the size of that card here, then we need to change the size of the child. Now text on the other hand is a widget which by default only takes as much space as this text needs. And if you want to change the size of text, you need to change the size of its parent. So what can we do here? Since this card depends on the child and this text depends on the parent, we have a dependency which is kind of hard to break, right? How can we increase the overall size of the card? There are two ways of breaking that. One is that we wrap that text with a widget where we can set a size. We can do that with the refactoring shortcut, which you can find in the key bindings in case you forgot it. And there we can wrap the text with a container, because container is the most universal styling, positioning, sizing widget you have. With a container, you can control almost anything when it comes to how something is sized or how something is aligned and styled, at least if we talk about things like background colors and so on. And therefore, once I wrap the text with a container, we can use the fact that on the container we can set a width. We could set this to 100, and this means the container will now have the width of 100 device pixels, which is a unit that always gives us the same size even on differently sized phones or devices. So now we can see that this container is a bit bigger. This becomes even clearer if I give that card a color, which is the background color, of, let's say, blue. If we do that, then we see it more clearly. So we can change the size of the card by increasing the size, or in this case the width, of the child, because now the child is a container. The direct child of the card is a container. On that we can set the width, and therefore we make sure that the card no longer depends on the width of this text, which is just as big as it needs to be, but instead on the width of the container, which we can control. You could also set this to double.infinity, which is a special value, which means take as much width as you can get. And here this means the container will take the entire width of the device, since there is no other surrounding element or widget around our card that would restrict the overall width the card can take. So that is how we could break this. Another option would be that we don't wrap our text here in a container, but the card. Again, with the refactoring tool, we can add a container around card. And now here we can also set the width to double infinity, for example. If we do that, we also have a card that takes the entire width. And that has one important implication. The important implication is that card by default depends on the size of its child, unless you have a parent for card, like container, which has its own clearly defined width. This also means that column doesn't seem to be such a parent, because when we just had column around our card, the card didn't expand to take the full available width. And indeed, column is a widget which only takes as much width as its children need. Now with container, we give column a child that says, please give me all the width I can get. and it takes all the width it can get, and therefore column sizes itself after that and also now takes the full available width, because column always has the width of its broadest, of its widest child. And card now does not take the width of its child, but since it has a parent that sets a clearly defined size, card actually takes the parent as a measurement and takes the width of the parent. Now, when you hear something like this the first time, it sounds like something that is incredibly hard to learn, because it sounds like you have to remember all these combinations by heart. You have to remember that a card takes the child width unless there is a parent that sets a clearly defined width. Now, 2 important points here. For one, you have the official docs, and things like that are typically noted in there. So you can take the official docs to learn how widgets behave regarding their size. And in addition, and this is really the best advice I can give you, don't learn such things by heart, learn them by doing. Experiment with things. If you have a card that doesn't have the size you want, start wrapping it in a container. See what happens if you set a width or height there. Start wrapping it with a column. See if that changes things. Start wrapping the child of the card with a container, and so on. So simply try things out, because you will have no chance of learning these things by heart. There are way too many combinations and widgets to do that. That's also why I don't provide a cheat sheet with all possible combinations, because that would be too many and too many to learn anyways. Try such things out. Build a dummy application where you can simply play around with widgets just like we're doing it here, and you will get a feeling for how you can combine widgets to get a certain result. And also important, in Flutter, there always is more than one way of getting a certain result. Just as you see it here, we could have added the container around the card or inside the card. Here, the result is the same, even though these are 2 different setups.